Do we have to be more explicit about this recovery and the need for Islam to confront its problems? I mean, in the book you state, for example, there is a creed that is promoting hatred through school systems, by which I presume you mean Wahhabism, which is emphatically not the kind of Islam you've just extolled now. Do we need to confront this head on?
Wahhabi Islam is a creation of the 19th century and of a particular deal that the leaders of what is today Saudi Arabia made with that group of clerics. It was a very, very minor strand of Islam until relatively recently. What happened, of course, was after the huge hike in oil prices in the 1970s and that enormous wealth, much of it was used to fund madrasas in various parts of the world, most conspicuously in Pakistan, teaching this very extreme form of Islam. And what we've seen ever since 9/11 and Al-Qaeda, and more emphatically since 2014 and the emergence of ISIS, almost from nowhere seemingly, is that somehow or other that voice of moderation has only rarely been heard within Islam. President al-Sisi of Egypt has had the courage to do so, but he's not a religious leader. And we are very short of religious leaders who've said so. Everyone will always, out of common politeness, out of a sense of moral decency, will say this kind of terror and violence is not Islam. But they have not yet said here is a kind of Islam that clearly is different in the way it sees the world and interprets its texts. So what is the rest of the world supposed to do? Sit and do nothing? No. What you do is you say, guys, here am I as a Jewish thinker telling you how we dealt with this within Judaism. I would hope Christian thinkers would say how they dealt with it within Christianity, although I've done that in the book as well, because they've done it. And I've done it really to encourage the emergence of moderate voices within Islam, because that's the most important thing we can do right now. We can't do it for Islam, but we can provide an environment where young Muslims say, you know what, that makes sense to me, let's do that.
That's great for the case of Islam in specifics. More generally, my final question to you, how can we win this battle against religious violence collectively?
Well, don't think it's going to be easy. I mean, Neil Ferguson wrote an article recently in which he challenged people who used the term, which the late Christopher Hitchens invented, Islamofascism. Now that is a very misleading word because fascism was built around the nation state. You could conceive of defeating Nazism by defeating Germany. Well, Islam is not predicated on a nation state. ISIS is not a geographically confined phenomenon. It can crop up in London and in California and in Libya and in bringing down a Russian airline, taking off from Sinai. I mean, it can. So this is a much bigger challenge than the world has ever faced before. It is big and it is serious. And those who think it can be dealt with purely by political means or purely by military means are making an enormous mistake. It took pretty much 50 years for this extreme strand, which was active certainly from, let's say, Wahhabism from the 19th century and the Muslim Brotherhood from 1928. But one way or another, if it took 50 years to grow extremism, it will take 50 years to grow a cogent and compelling alternative to it. But you begin now, and you have to be as long-term and as patient and as deliberate as the extremists have been. So there's no quick fix for this. And if we continue to believe there is a quick fix, by aerial bombing campaigns, for instance, or even by Syria's ground forces in Syria and Iraq, let me guarantee you that if the West defeats ISIS, utterly and completely, it will reappear again within 5 years somewhere else under a different name, the exact same phenomenon. People are not fully yet understanding how big, how deep, and how long-term this takes. And I hope our short attention spans will not be the death of us. Let's get going now. Let us rouse the conscience of good and thoughtful Muslims and Jews and Christians, and let us not forget that Hindus and Buddhists and Sikhs are all involved in their own local forms of religiously motivated violence. Buddhists in Myanmar and Hindu nationalists in India, and so on. This is a huge global issue. We were not prepared for the re-emergence of religion as an earth-shaking force. Religion brings out some of the best in human beings, but it also provides justification for some of the worst. So we have got to fight the battle for the better angels of our nature. The sooner we begin, the better. And the more we do so in the company of good, moderate Muslims, Christians and others, the better it'll be for all of us.
Well, Rabbi Lord Sachs, thank you for an uplifting end to a fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.